Hello everybody, my name is Brian Stewart. I'm the co-founder of Electrify now, and today we're talking about how to survive power outages. Most of the time I'm talking about how to electrify your home and your life, but today we're going to talk about what happens when the electricity goes out, and we're going to focus on lower cost ways to stay safe without spending a ton of money. And I want to emphasize this idea of low-cost ways to stay safe because we're not talking in this case about whole home backup. It is possible to do that with a gas generator, a propane generator, or even with a large battery backup system and a solar array on your roof. But we're really talking about lower cost ways to do that don't cost tens of thousands of dollars like those other solutions I mentioned. You got to think about it though as more like how to camp comfortably in your own home for a few days until the power comes back on. Not just living the way you used to live when everything was working the way it's supposed to. So what we're really talking about is, well, first of all, we need to mention one little myth, which is that a lot of people think that their gas appliances are going to keep them safe and comfortable without electricity, but this is just not true. Your gas furnace won't work. Your gas water heater probably won't work if it's relatively new. Your gas stove will work, but you have to be really careful about using it because it's going to create so much indoor air pollution in minutes, so you have to have all the windows and doors open. And a gas fireplace is the one thing that could work when you're, if you can light it without an electronic ignition. But these other devices don't work because you need electricity to use them either at all or safely to power the fans and the motors that make them work. So there's a myth there that gas homes are more resilient. It's not really true. What we're going to be talking about is, particularly if you have an electric home, how to stay safe with these devices. Basically, some backup power, some lights, some air filtration, how to cook and heat your home when everything is gone haywire with the electric grid. So let's start with backup power. There's a lot of these devices that are available on the market. They're amazing. They're all basically lithium-ion batteries that come in various sizes from various producers. These are 4 of the most highly rated ones that I'm aware of. They will all have some version of an array of AC outlet plugs. You can plug virtually anything that runs on electricity into them. And USB plugs that you can charge your phone or your laptop with. They're great for powering the basics. They're not going to run the heat pump to heat your water or your furnace, your space heating, but they will operate most of the devices that we need, and we'll talk about that. They range in costs, and mostly it's about how big they are. And the costs range from hundreds of dollars to thousands depending on the size that you need. And we'll talk about that. So how big should you get? I don't think it's really worth getting anything under 500, and even 500 I think is 500 watt hours is a sort of borderline, because as you can see here, it's great for charging your phone and your laptop. You can even run some LED lights off this for a while. But you're not going to be able to even use a coffee maker or induction hot plate because it doesn't generate enough watts of output. It'll max out at about 500, and for most things that require any kind of heat, you need probably about 1,000, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 to really operate those devices. And those are the devices that suck a lot of energy, and you'll see. With 1,000 watts, obviously you can charge those things we talked about for twice as long, including an air filter, or a refrigerator even. And now you can use your hot plate. A coffee maker might be a little sketchy because these things generally are going to put out about somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 watts, and a coffee maker can push it up to closer to 1,800. So a coffee maker might not work, but you can definitely use your induction hot plate, one of those mini plates we'll talk about later. And then of course you get a bigger one, you can get more charges, and they can go up to about 2,000. And what you see is the cost of these pretty much is $100 for 100 watt hours, roughly speaking. I mean, they're going to vary a little bit from manufacturer to manufacturer, but generally speaking, for $2,000, you're going to be able to get 2,000 watt hours of battery life. So one of the ways of thinking about how big you should get, these are 2 scenarios that I recommend. I'm most familiar with the Jackery line. These are the ones that we have ourselves, but these other makers make great products as well. I like the idea of 2 1,000 kilowatt hour batteries. One 1,500 would do, but with the 2,000 watt batteries, what you get is the ability to use one while you're recharging the other, which we'll talk about. They're also lighter weight, so they're easier to move around. The 1,500 watt hour battery starts to get a little heavy. But this gives you a pretty good idea about what you could expect within 24 hours. If you had two of you are in a house for 24 hours, you're both going to be able to charge your phones and your laptops. You can run some LED lights. You can run an air filter, and we're going to talk about all these things individually later. You can run an air filter for several hours to keep the air in your room clean. That's particularly important if you have a wildfire problem. You know, if you don't have bad air situation, that means you could run your refrigerator longer or use some of these other devices more. And in both cases, you're going to get an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. I think that's conservative. You could probably get more than that because most of the time you're not cooking on high all the time. But at least an hour of cooking, which is going to be plenty for making a couple of quick meals to keep yourself fed while the power is out. So if within 24 hours, this is going to be great. But what happens if it's more than multiple days? Then you're going to start to need to figure out, well, how do I recharge these batteries? And there's a couple options. One is solar panels. Most of the makers offer these solar panels that you can buy separately. They're not cheap. They're roughly $300 for a 100 amp panel and twice that for a 200 amp panel. And typically you're going to need 4 of these to get any kind of decent charging. And even then, in my experience, you need to be expecting this to take, well, they say 4 hours. That's if you had the completely clear day in the middle of the summer with great insolation. If you've got low sun or partial sun, it's going to take way longer than that. Personally, I think this is a little bit sketchy solution to rely on, but it's pretty good in an emergency to get yourself some backup charging. I think a better solution is if you've got an EV, you've got this giant battery sitting in your parking lot. Someday, and we'll talk about that, you can just plug this right into your house and get juice straight from it. But in the meantime, you can plug your battery into your car to charge your battery when you're not using it, which is again why having 2 is great, because you can be recharging one while you're using the other. All of these electric vehicles are going to have some kind of cigarette lighter type of 12 volt DC charger, which is going to be slow, but it will work. So roughly overnight, you're going to be able to recharge one of these. Many cars have 2 of these things, so you could be charging 2 batteries overnight, potentially. Or some automobiles have a 110 volt AC outlet, which is even better, like the Hyundais have that, and many of the newer design models. For some reason, Tesla overlooked this, and all they have is these 12 volt DC chargers. But the newer models, a lot of them have 110 volt outlets, which is going to charge one of these batteries in a couple of hours. So this is the great way to recharge your battery. I think it's the most reliable, and maybe another reason to invest in an EV, because you've got this battery that will literally run your house for several days or week just sitting there when you basically aren't going to be using it because there's nowhere to go when the power's out. So it's a really great solution. All right, let's talk about the other issues that you need to be prepared for. Lights. This is one of the most important one, and everyone's had this horrible situation where you go to grab your flashlight and the batteries are either worn out and dead, or worse, they're all corroded like this, and which is just like a reason to curse and not much value. And problematic if you're relying on this when the lights go out. So the best solution are these little LED rechargeable lights. There's tons of them on the market. They're small and amazingly powerful. They put out insane amounts of light. They're about the size of a beer can. They cost you somewhere between $20 and $60, but you can get a really good one for under $50. And they're going to run for anywhere from 10 to as much as 400 hours, depending on how high you have the light setting on. And the great thing about these things is you can keep them plugged into your backup battery, which we just talked about, so they're always charged. And that means they're always ready, which is what you want. Another thing to be thinking about, particularly out here in the West where wildfires are an issue, and sometimes power outages coincide with wildfire problems, air filtration can be a real important thing to think about. I think you should be thinking about it all the time anyway, because most home systems aren't adequate to keep up with really, really bad air during wildfire season. These small portable systems are really affordable. They come from many multiple brands. Consumer Reports has a great article and ratings. I'm a fan of the Blue Air ones. I promise I don't get paid for them, but I know from experience they work really well. They're affordable. For $250, you can get one that's going to keep 1 or 2 rooms in your house very clean in terms of air quality, like spotless if you run it all the time. And if you run it sporadically, you can definitely keep it in a safe zone. So these things are amazing. They don't take a lot of energy to run. Like we said, that 1,000 watt hour battery will run one of these for 6 hours, 5 or 6 hours, pretty comfortably. So definitely you want to invest in one of these if wildfires are an issue in your area. Okay, then we're gonna cooking. This is the one where it takes more energy, and there's really two reasonable options. One I think is the best, which is induction cooking. And you can buy these little induction hot plates. They're really affordable for 60 bucks, under 100 for sure. You can get a really good one. Duck's Top is one of the highest rated brands, but there's a lot of good makers. And essentially these things are so great because they're the most efficient way to heat, because all the energy goes into the pot and the food essentially. About 85% of the energy goes into your food as opposed to into the warming the air, warming the little box itself, the grill, all this stuff. So they're super energy efficient. They don't take too much energy, but you'll see from that chart that we showed earlier, you got to be conservative about how much you use it. And they're not going to create any indoor air pollution, which is key, and why the other option that I'm going to talk about is good, but you got to be careful. You can operate a propane camp stove inside your home. The manufacturers will tell you not to do this, and there's reasons for it because they don't want to be sued, but the reason is because there's real danger of carbon monoxide poisoning, which can lead to death, literally. I mean, and it's really an issue. You see this a lot in after emergencies like the hurricane in Florida, for example. There's the tragic deaths that happen as part of the storm, but then people that revert to these kind of ways to stay safe and warm afterwards oftentimes run into really tragic problems by not operating these with the windows open or something like that. So if you use a propane stove, you have to be in a well ventilated area. So you're gonna have to crack a window next to where you're cooking for a little while, and then you can close it afterwards. You really should invest in it. A carbon monoxide detector, they're not expensive. Google makes a really good one, and have it handy so that you can run that when you're cooking, and then you'll know that you're okay. These things are not expensive. They use these little propane tanks. They're easy to refill. The other thing you have to keep in mind though is you don't want to store those propane tanks inside where you live, because if they leak, it can lead to explosions and that sort of thing too. So it's best to store them in the garage or someplace where they're outside your living space. So tons of options here in terms of brands, and they're not really expensive. You do want to make sure you get one that will deliver at least 12,000 BTUs of heat, because there are some that are more like backpack stoves and it can take you like 20 minutes or half an hour to boil some water. It's ridiculous. So get one with decent power rating. And the last subject is heating, which is the hardest one. We talked about gas fireplace inserts being really, the one good thing about them is that they are going to keep your one room at least of your house warm when nothing else is working. But for me, it's not a good trade-off to have this thing, consuming gas all year long, potentially just for the 1 or 2 days when you need it, when the power goes out. So I think it's best to ditch your gas fireplace. But there are these small propane heaters that are, again, very powerful, use the same little canisters we were talking about, and they're rated for indoor use. But the manufacturers will tell you that you need to have ventilation, so you need to crack a window again when you're using this. And the heat that's generated is generally going to overcome the cold air that's coming in through the window. But the danger is that you turn this thing on, you're all toasty, and you fall asleep in your room with no window, and then you die of carbon monoxide poisoning, literally. That's why I really want to emphasize that you have got to be careful when you use these things indoors. But they can provide some life-saving heat, particularly if you live in a really cold area. Here in Portland, where we live, I wouldn't recommend this because it doesn't get that cold that often where you would really need this. But if you live in a cold place, I could see how you might need this. So these things, again, they're relatively cheap. And this one from Heat Buddy is one of the highest rated ones I could find online. But this is probably the best solution I can find for heating if you really need it when the power goes out. All right, so the future. It's not quite here yet. It's close. The Ford 150 is close to delivering this, and you can make this happen if you own a Ford 150. But our EVs have so much power in them. They can run our homes, including the space heating and the air conditioning, for several days with the amount of power that's out there. But most of them aren't set up yet to be able to deliver that power back into our homes. It will happen, and I don't think it will take long, but it's not quite here yet. But just to give you an idea, we were talking about these 1,000 watt hour or 1,500 watt hour batteries. An EV has 50 times that or more, as much as 100 times that sitting in your parking lot. So imagine that you had 100 of these batteries that we we're just talking about, where you can get by in a day with one or two of them. You can see how powerful your EV is. And this is what we will be doing in the future. I hope that helps. We have tons of information on our website about how to electrify your home. And I really want to make sure you find this helpful to stay safe and comfortable in case there's a power outage in your area. Thank you very much, and good luck with all your electrification projects.